This is week 2, module 2, statutes that override wills. I think this is a surprise to a lot of you, especially those of you in community property states where you're not used to hearing about a will being overridden by statutes. I think we're all aware that will substitutes override wills. So if there's an asset that's in a trust and also in a will, it's going to be covered by the terms of the trust, because again, wills cover those assets not covered by the will substitutes, but there's also statutes, and primarily these are concerned with common law states, so let's go through them. Surviving spouses have rights under common law, and this really derives from the English laws of going back centuries. In many states, we'll find that the surviving spouse is allowed to elect against the will, and it's under the United Probate Code, Uniform Probate Code, spousal elections, elective share. I have a tough time with this, aren't I? But it's Uniform Probate Code. I don't pay a lot of attention to because it's not uniform, and it's very few states follow it compared to what you'd expect. I think most people think when you hear Uniform Probate Code that it's going to be found in all states, and it isn't, and is interpreted different in different states. We have some judges in the states who will interpret it different than other judges. So within a state, you may have different interpretations. But they do have what's called a spousal elective share, where the spouse can elect in lieu of the will. In other words, the spouse look at what's available in the will, looks at what's available under the statute, and picks which approach they want to go. And the amount that you can have varies by state. It varies by length of marriage in some cases. Some cases it's a flat percentage, and in some cases how the will share, not an additive. Some rare cases it would actually be an additive to the will. So you really got to look at the state law of the individual state for purposes of this course, realizing that there is a will substitute that's called, which overrides the will, called a spousal elective share, and it can be very useful for your client if you're representing the surviving spouse. Community property estates are different, and that's because spouses are assumed to be taken care of because they have half interest in all properties that are acquired by wages or self-employment while married and while domiciled in a community property estate. So if you have a community property estate involved, you're probably not going to run into any statutes. As far as I know, none of the community property estates have the statutes overriding will, but the states that are common law do. And of course, someone from California or Arizona, Texas is going to say, well, why do we have to study these statutes of the states? Well, because you might have real estate in the state. Let's say you have real estate in Colorado or real estate in Hawaii. They are going to be subject to these statutes. Additional statutes that override a will, and I note here in lieu of and not in addition to the bequest under a will. Historically, dower and courtesy are still found in some states as a term. Again, we have to look at the individual state as to what they cover. Homestead allowance, for those of you in California and some of the states where homestead allowance is used for bankruptcy, this is a different use of the term. This is for protection of spouses on the death of their spouse. Homestead exemption, exempt property award statute, mortmain statutes, which are designed to prevent the deceased from giving too much of the assets to charities and not to the family members, family allowance statute, pre-terminated errors, and omitted error statutes. These are covered in your textbook. I think for purposes of this lecture, we should be aware that these exist, and we need to know the information about it to the level that's called out in your lecture. So there's some miscellaneous statutes that we should be aware of. The felonious homicide statute, which means if I kill you, I cannot inherit from you, which makes sense. and that, I believe, statutes in all states. There's another statute that's found in many states, which is an advancement statute that says that if you have a situation where one of the potential beneficiaries of the estate is given assets prior to death, that's going to be subtracted from the assets at death. And I'll give you an example. I have 3 children. 2 of my children are very successful. One is on a marginal case and is constantly borrowing money that isn't paid back. So with that child, I finally said, okay, we'll give you some more money, but when I die, we're going to reduce your share of the assets at death, so you're not going to get the same as your siblings. And the child understands that, and that's what's in the will, so that they get something, but not as much as the other 2. Now, we could have them completely left out. Then we have disclaimer statutes, which we'll be talking about later on, the disclaimer clause, which allows a person not to accept the assets if it makes sense not to accept it. And I guess my favorite on the disclaimer, if someone is 92 years old in the hospital in poor health and finds out they're the beneficiary of $1 million, it is probably not a good move for that person to take that asset. They should disclaim the asset, and if they're the spouse of the decedent, then they can disclaim the corpus but keep the interest so long as they live. This is the end of the second module for week 2. I suggest that you look at module 3 at your earliest convenience.